You are listening to Fantha Tracks.
Because of the following special program, Wonder Woman and the Incredible Hulk will not be presented this evening.
It's time to get all your Star Wars news in a single file. This is Making Tracks. Here are your hosts, Mark Newbold and Mark Mulcaster.
That's not true. That's impossible.
Hello and welcome to episode 78 of Making Tracks, brought to you by the fine folk over at fanthatracks.com. My name's Mark, and this week, as always, I am joined by our main man from the Midlands, Mr. Mark Newbold. Marky, how are you doing?
I'm good, how are you?
I'm alright, thanks buddy. I'm not too bad. I've had Star Wars figures turn up again this week, believe it or not.
Right.
And another Star Wars delivery. It basically means that I've got to make more space in a very cluttered and quite small collection room. So yeah, how about you? How has your week in Star Wars been?
It's been busy. There's loads of news, obviously. And in terms of stuff turning up, what have I had turn up this week? I've had the Lego minifigure of Visual History turn up, an Empire Strikes Back ticket from 1980. Beautiful, of long, tall ticket with the classic Gone with the Wind picture on the front. And a few other bits and bobs. Mark Daniels sent out some beautiful redone versions of olds in the style of the old Palator sort of shelf edge stuff. Absolutely gorgeous. So I had some of those turn up. And a few other bits and bobs. There's always bits and bobs turning up.
Did you pick up that ticket from... There's a Star Wars like ephemera Facebook collecting group, isn't there? Are you part of that? Or where did you get that from?
I'm not. Oh, now I should Google ephemera because that's exactly the sort of stuff I like. No, it was from... it's like a Star Wars cast and crew type Facebook group. And there's always cool bits. The other cool thing I got was... And I'm only after one more now. I've got the ILM do the little pin badges for each of their projects. So I now have the Last Jedi, Rogue One, Solo. So Rogue One was K2SO, the head of K2SO.
Uh-huh.
Solo was the Falcon.
Makes sense.
The Lando era Falcon. Last Jedi was a little sort of insignia, like a Resistance insignia. And the Rise of Skywalker one was the Medal of Yavin, so it's a small sort of bronze little Medal of Yavin. The only one I've not got is the Force Awakens one, which I'm on the hunt for. So the Rise of Skywalker one turned up this week, so that was
cool.
Was really cool because I love little trinkety bits. So I'm always on the lookout for stuff like that. But yeah, it's been a good week for hunting things down. I'm quite pleased. I filled in a few little gaps this week. Did a really nice interview with a guy called Rob van der Werf from Holland for his site, just generally talking about Star Wars and collecting and stuff. So it was really cool. I was up in the collection room sort of mooching around and showing him bits and bobs as we spoke about collecting and memories of collecting and just what sort of things we're all into. And then this morning actually took about 66 photographs of the room, which again is nice. It's nice for me to sort of have it in a folder to sort of refer to and look back on because the room's always changing. So changing things around, pulled half the back of the room out to give it a good clean because you don't realise how dirty the windows get and how dust gathers in corners because you can't see. You don't realise. I pulled stuff out. I was like, oh my God, this window's practically walking out the room. So, got that sorted. But mostly this week, I was surprised by how much news there was.
Yeah.
And sort of talkable, chew-overable, that's a word now, stuff that we can go through. So, I'm looking forward to this episode. But anyway, I rabbit as usual.
Me too. Loads to talk about, but rabbiting's fine. You know, especially if it's Star Wars. That's what we're here for. Star Wars, not Star Trek. I'm sure somebody will mention it at some point. So, you know what? We should kind of have some kind of like klaxon. Whoever mentioned Star Trek for the first time on the show has to edit the show. That's what we should do.
Well, I hate to break it to you, mate. You mentioned Star Trek just then before I did, so...
We can cut this bit out, so it's fine.
Only if you edit. Only if you edit.
Only if I edit, exactly. Well, lots to talk about, so let's crack on with some of the news.
Hey man, it's me, Kevin Smith, a Star Wars fan, Fantha Tracks fan.
Let's be fair, Star Wars and rumours go together pretty much like nerf stakes and Corellian ale. And it hasn't taken long for the rumours to start to float about surrounding the upcoming slate of new Star Wars shows that were announced back in November by Disney. One of which is a possibility that we might see Aladdin actor Mena Massoud, and I hope I've got that pronounced correctly, do the live-action debut for Ezra Bridger from Star Wars Rebel. This was kind of broken by Kessel Run transmission over the weekend, I believe, on their show. So what's your thoughts on this, Marky Boy? Does this have a tinge of fan casting about it, or is there some kind of validity behind this rumour? I mean, I guess it's in the name, really, isn't it? It is a rumour at this point, but what's your take?
It's a tricky one, isn't it? Because, like you say, Star Wars and rumours goes together so well. Strawberries and cream, blah, blah, blah. Pick your analogy. And you've got to pick your analogies well these days and get you into trouble if you don't. I think there's probably some legs in this, quite apart from the fact that Kessel Run transmissions are busy, active, forward-looking site, young guys working on it, and Dan Curto, who is an old fart, and lots of other elements to the story. I think there's some sense in what they say. One, visibly, I'm looking at the piece on Fantha at the moment, you can quite literally see Mena Massoud in that role. His aesthetic is correct for the role. Not that that's essentially important, but nevertheless, there is a sort of a template look for Ezra because obviously he's coming from animation in Rebels, so there is that to consider. But also the fact that he did work on Aladdin for Disney, $1 billion movie. Never remember hearing of any issues with him on that film, so that probably is a good tick in the box. And also just the fact that, these projects now move closer by the day. Another comparison, there's all these rumours of the Marvel stuff. People are fan casting, Mr. Fantastic and the Fantastic Four. Somebody the other day said that Jennifer Lawrence had been signed up to play Sue Storm in Fantastic Four. Marvel actually came out the other day and said, we're only just sitting down to write it. I don't think we're going to cast it before we started writing it, are we? So there's rumours like that you can shoot down in a moment. And then something like this that you look at and go, well, actually, that would kind of make sense if you even if you work out the age of the character, the age of Ezra moving forward into that time period, even that kind of. But yeah, I think when I say ballpark, I think you can go forward or back 5 years on the character and still be within the target area. Again, until Lucasfilm confirm it, it is just a fan rumor.
Yeah, exactly. Like you said, just a rumor at this point. But it's interesting because I remember when Star Wars Rebels came out, a lot of people compared the animation style and like the look of Ezra to Aladdin. It's that kind of that bright-eyed kind of that look. So that's quite an interesting, slightly ironic kind of join the dots there. When there's a new show announced, that means there's basically empty character slots. So therefore, it means that basically, why not? And it's quite fun actually. Sometimes I think to go through and actually do a what if? Who could we cast in this role? And what's your dream cast member for certain role and stuff like that. He hasn't spoken out or confirmed it in any shape or form on social media that I'm aware of. Yeah, I guess we just watch his space and see how this one develops. But I'm going to mark this one in the notebook, and then we can revisit this when we start to get some confirmations on the Ahsoka cast.
Hello, I'm Ahmed Best, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks.
Plenty of Rian Johnson related news has dropped this week, and most of it coming from Soraya Wilson, who has interviewed Rian. Has been trickling out tweets and reveals from the conversation that they had. And one that came out that was particularly interesting, and there's a couple in this episode that we'll chew over. And I'll read exactly what Soraya said. If anybody questions whether or not Reylo were meant to be a romantic, you can stop speculating. Ryan absolutely saw them as a romance, and then the little heart face with the heart eyes and happy smiles and such. Loads of replies to that. On social media, and lots of conversation, I'm sure, on other podcasts and websites. The piece I wrote, I'll read out the piece I wrote. While remembering this is a paraphrased comment, because she hasn't annotated it or anything, she's just sort of trickling news out. Paraphrased comment from an unreleased interview given by the writer-director of the middle chapter of a 3-film sequence. It's certainly interesting to learn that The Last Jedi writer and director Rian Johnson absolutely saw the trilogy-spanning Kylo Ren and Rey relationship as a romance one. So the reason I phrased it like that was, obviously, Rian Johnson just did The Last Jedi, and he has clearly said that, to his mind, the Rey and Kylo relationship in that one film was a romance. Mark, what do you think of that? Because obviously you're bookending Last Jedi with 2 J.J. Abrams films. So J.J., as I mentioned later in the piece, had different thoughts on what that relationship was. So what do you make of Ryan's perspective on that particular romance, or particular relationship, I should say?
The middle chapter of a trilogy is probably the best place to really start to kind of develop any form of kind of relationship between 2 characters. We saw that with The Empire Strikes Back. It normally, at least in Star Wars terms, it's kind of like a slightly slower, chilled episode. And so it means that you can have these more kind of finite character beats. For me, I've always kind of likened the fact that they had this kind of connection. The thing that I always took away from it was that one scene in the hut on Act 2 where they finally kind of touch through kind of like their Force Skype. And for me, at least when I watched it, I kind of likened that pretty much with the emphasis on the actual physical touch to pretty much be like a kiss, if I'm honest. That's kind of how I saw it. I mean, it kind of did bring me then back to what Irvin Kershner said about the kiss in The Empire Strikes Back, where he basically said the kiss in Empire Strikes Back is equivalent of a sex scene in Star Wars. And so whilst I don't think the slight touching of the hands is equivalency of a sex scene in The Last Jedi, I do think it has some kind of emotional connotation to the connection between the two characters, similar to a romantic kiss. As to how it then kind of plays into the next story, well, then that's basically absolutely open to debate. And this kind of brings us right back to the whole topic of, was the films planned out as much as they could have been or should have been? You kind of, even in The Force Awakens, you kind of think there's definitely a connection between Rey and Kylo, but there was always that odd thing of like Kylo being aware of who she is, like, you know, what girl on Jakku and stuff like that. And so there sounds like there's always a significance to some form of kind of pre-existing relationship.
Yeah, it's a tricky one. You made a really good point at the start of what you were saying about how obviously Empire was when the Han-Leia relationship develops. Attack of the Clones is where the Anakin-Padme relationship develops. So you could, if you want to make, and Star Wars really is all about the parallels, isn't it? You know, you could look at Kylo and it's not Ben and Rey, it's Kylo and Rey we're talking about. It's Reylo, not Benlo.
Yeah.
Or Ray-Ben or whatever you want to call him, Ray-Ban, I don't know. Whatever. So, you know, that's that thing. And like I say, go back to what I said last week, you know, the abusive relationship aspect. I see that a lot on social media. And you could look at the initial, you know, as he's trying to figure her out. That I still think that's one of the best scenes in Force Awakens, when she's on the chained up to the table and he's trying to get inside her head. And she's at first, what the hell, I don't know how to stop this. And then you can literally watch it in real time as she's figuring it out. It's all internal, but we're seeing the outside, you know, thing of him suddenly looking quizzical and he can't get in. The sound effects are amazing because you hear that Kylo sort of buzzing sound when he uses the dark side. Yeah. And she's pushing back, you know, and by the end of that whole little thing, she's reading his mind. You know, he goes in to sort of violate her, if you want to put it in those terms. And at the end of it, she's the one that kind of does it to him. She, you know, he's like, I can read your mind. I can see the island. And at the end of it, she's like, you just want to be Darth Vader. And she probably doesn't even know who Darth Vader is. She's clearly pulled that out of his head. So there's that power balance thing going on there. But like I say, Rian Johnson says, oh yeah, definitely romance. And I pointed to, and I put in the quote from JJ as well, because I think that's relevant, not to dismiss anything that Rian Johnson has said, because he was directing his own film and he wrote it as well, but to point out that it was a bookend, you know, that you had already had the Rise of the Force Awakens, and of course the Rise of Skywalker can only pick up the baton from The Last Jedi. The Rise of Skywalker can't pick up the baton from The Force Awakens, if that makes sense. He must continue that Episode 8 story. And JJ said, there's as much of a brother and sister thing with Rey and Kylo Ren as there is romantic. So it's not literally a sexual romantic thing. It's more like they're just bound together in this crazy spiritual way. Again, it felt romantic to me, but it was. And then he says, it's like John Williams. If you listen to John Williams, when he first wrote the Luke's theme for the original Star Wars, it was a romantic theme for Luke and Leia. That was kind of what he was thinking because he didn't know where it was going. So that points a little bit to what you said about, I wish they'd plotted these three films better. But I wish they'd thought the three out instead of just doing them on the hop. Because what I think that the schism, if you want to call it that, or the disparity, I don't know what you would say, is that you've got J.J. Abrams with his sensibilities, and then you've got Rian Johnson, whose sensibilities are completely different. When Irvin Kershner was brought in to do Empire Strikes Back by George Lucas, he brought Kersh in because, one, he was a mentor to Lucas, and he sort of knew what he was about. And whilst Kersh very much did his own thing, to the point where Lucas was probably pulling his hair out and cutting his fingernails down at the quick, the end result was a film that doesn't jibe against Star Wars. I mean, obviously, in terms of what happens in Empire and Star Wars, they're completely different. It is a much more adult film. And then Jedi, again, with Mark Wind, was a different film to that. So the three films are very much their own thing. But that trilogy pretty much fits. The point that JJ is looking at, though, is the Luke and Leia thing, because if Lucas had have known when he wrote Star Wars, even Lucas didn't really know that Luke and Leia were brother and sister, that Vader was the father and all of that stuff. He would have probably written it differently, but life's not like that. No. I mean, go back a few years, we all watched Jeremy Kyle, we all watched, all those silly Jerry Springer.
Speak for yourself.
You know what I'm saying. Yeah. You work for Sky, you've seen everything. We've seen all these things where, I married my pony sort of stuff, but then you get the occasional crazy story turns up of weird family stuff that comes out the blue. Could very easily go down an avenue we don't want to go down on a family podcast with that one, but you know what I'm getting at. A lot of things are unexpected in life, a lot of things are unexpected, and so you can kind of work around that one. But with Rey and Kylo, him seeing it as a romance, it's just so interesting that, to me, it was interesting that Johnson saw it as that and Abrams saw it as something entirely different.
I mean, I'm glad they're not actual paternal brothers and sisters. I mean, that could have been a little bit too on the nose, I think. And it's good to reference previous Star Wars work. It's that YA kind of relationship where it's not just like pure romance, there's lots of ups and downs, and a bit like, the Katniss Peter kind of relationship from Hunger Games, in my mind. But you speak about Lucas, it comes back to the whole, there is another notion, whereby originally he had planned to have Luke's sister be revealed, and I don't know, I think it was like episode 9 or something, quite a way away. But then obviously as the working on the films kind of took its toll, and he kind of was like, let's just wrap this up now with Return of the Jedi. Let's kind of basically do a retcon to make Leia the sister. But I don't necessarily think you can kind of call it a retcon, because it was not like it was emphasized in either for or against that she was his sister or wasn't his sister in any other film, really. And obviously then when you go back and you do the prequels, and obviously you can retrofit in whatever explanation you need. So I think there's that. Love or hate The Last Jedi, I think, again, there's some really interesting character dynamics in that film. And like I said in last week's episode, even the overture of Kylo Ren in Snoke's throne room kind of, to me, felt more like a proposal, more of a romantic proposal than just a let's work together and let's rule the galaxy as, Kylo Ren and Kylo Rey.
That's a good one.
Thank you. Yeah. So I think there was definitely the potential, but then I think it doesn't necessarily mean that you couldn't necessarily work up to that, but then actually at that point where they could almost get together, but actually Rey kind of sees through him, sees him for what he is or who he is, which she kind of does in Rise of Skywalker, and then they go in a slightly different route. And again, it comes back to the connotation of and how you read that kiss in Rise of Skywalker. Was it a kiss of appreciation, or was it a kiss of more romantic connotations? So there's lots you can kind of like delve into about that.
Yeah, I think just stepping onto Rise of Skywalker, to me, the Rey Kylo, and you kind of do have to, it's like splitting Anakin and Vader, isn't it? It's Kylo and Ben are two separate things. Rey and Ben, I could see if he hadn't have made the sacrifice to return the life force back to her she had given to him and all that sort of stuff, and he had to survive, then I could have and would have quite happily enjoyed to see more of those two characters going off and doing their thing together, because it would have felt like they'd earned it. They were both, he was the sort of grandson of Vader, rather. She's the granddaughter of Palpatine. These two powerhouses of a previous age, and and they've both worked together as a dyad to defeat the Emperor finally, and all that stuff. So if they'd have been able to move on and survive, great. But I still think I wouldn't call it sacrifice, because he was doing the right thing, sort of thing. But him passing into the Force the way he did had a very sort of Qui-Gon feel to me. It felt like the right thing. He did the right thing, and that's why he was accepted into the Force. And we've seen Yoda in Last Jedi. We know that we see Luke in Rise of Skywalker. We know that the Force ebbs and flows over time. There's a lot of stuff happening in the High Republic right now. I've seen a few interesting tweets about that. People saying how, how the Jedi would only accept children into their ranks if they were offered, and it was a willing, given thing, that these children were going to a better destiny and all that sort of stuff. When you get to the prequel trilogy era, that's not the case. It's, there's a little bit of subversion going on to fill their ranks, because there's less Jedi. It's because the Force is ebbing and flowing. It's swinging towards the dark side. It's our balance thing. So, you can look at the Force as an ebb, as a tidal thing almost. And I think by the time you get to the Rise of Skywalker, the tide has swung back towards, inverted commas, the light, and it's all about points of view. So if that had happened, I think that would have been quite interesting. I would have been all in for that. But it didn't. I think with the kiss, as you just alluded to, which I loved, and Williams was clearly scoring that as a romance. Clearly, the music couldn't be more sweeping.
It's like 1940s, kind of like 1950s Gone with the Wind, go full-on romance. Yeah, I mean, it's almost a little bit cliched, to be honest. But it works.
That's the music. You know, the classic Gone with the Wind, Empire Strikes Back poster we just mentioned.
Yeah.
I mentioned earlier on the ticket thing. That's the music that should have been playing when Han gives her that sort of Gone with the Wind kiss, which you don't see in the film. It's not a Gone with the Wind kiss like that in the film, but you know what I'm getting at. It's that kind of feel. So there, to me, I tend to see it a bit more like JJ. I tend to see it as they've been through this huge thing together, and it's all happened over the course of 12 months. It's come and gone in a heartbeat, really, in their lives. It's 12 months, but nevertheless, they've been through this traumatic thing together. They were kind of connected, but they didn't know why, and they figured it all out. And to me, Rey's kiss at the end wasn't let's snog and get married and have kids together and live happily ever after kiss. It was a, thank God we got through that. You know what I mean? It was a relief, and it was a way to express her. I don't know. There's clearly an attraction. Like you said, thank goodness they weren't actually related, because that would have been like the wrong version of the Luke and Leia kissing Empire, wouldn't it? No. If we knew what we knew then, we wouldn't have done that. That's why nobody ever talks about Splinter of the Mind's Eye.
Exactly.
It's that sort of thing. So, but yeah, I think I completely get why Rian Johnson feels that way about his Star Wars film in this trilogy.
This is Steve Bloom, voice of Zeb Aurelius, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks. Caravast. May the Force be with you.
So it's a week on from when the news broke that Lucasfilm and Disney have severed ties with the Mandalorian actor Gina Carano. Yet the argument still rages on as to whether or not it was fair for the corporation to do so. But The Hollywood Reporter has published an article online which delved into the recent decision by Lucasfilm to end their working relationship with Gina Carano, as well as the future plans for her character. In a nutshell, the article reveals that Lucasfilm has no plans to recast the Cara Dune character. So what do we think about this? Are we surprised? Are we disappointed? I mean, how much scope and growth do we think a character like that could possibly have?
I think that's a terrible shame, actually. I really, really was enjoying the Cara Dune character. Now, I know because of what the actress said and everything that's gone down, and, it's a shame that will colour the character. People won't be able to split Cara Dune from Gina Carano. And now it sounds like they'll never be able to do that because, as you say, Lucasfilm have pretty much said they're not expecting to recast the character. There's no more plans for Cara Dune. Now, in the Star Wars galaxy, with characters travelling across these vast areas of space, you land on a planet, there's nothing to say that you're going to bump into a character just because they're on that planet. Somebody came to Earth, there's no reason they would bump into Mr. Smith from number 43 Acacia Avenue if they land in India, is there?
Exactly.
So it's the odds of ever meeting anyone more than once in the Star Wars galaxy really is ridiculously small anyway, but because this is the story we tell, you do. But that being said, I do think it's a real shame because Cara as a character, clearly, and we said it last week on the show and we've mentioned it on the site, there's so much more mileage in that character because of her background, because of her history, because of the new shows that are coming, whether she was directly involved in Rangers of the New Republic or not, to me, it feels like she was the sort of character that could come in and go out. I don't think she would have, maybe she would, but I don't feel like she would have been like a series regular because,
no.
Okay, in season 2 of Mando, she's put her roots down for the first time in a long time. And you look back at the character, and of course, she's from Alderaan. Obviously, she wasn't on Alderaan when it got blown up, so she's lost all of her friends, all of her family, everything she ever knew. Gone in a heartbeat. She joins the Rebel Alliance, which eventually becomes the New Republic after, Endor and Jakku and all that. Shock trooper, she's trained up, she's clearly physically powerful woman, so, it's kind of like the role that suited her, and drop trooper sort of SAS type stuff, drops in, takes out the, Imperial remnant warlords and bad guys. But then there's only so much of that. That there was only so much of that, and eventually that work dries up. Because, she's working for a unit. They're probably going to have a certain area of the galaxy that they work in. They're not going to be pinging left, right and centre. They're probably going to work in a certain area. So she wipes up that area. And then all of a sudden she's working on breaking up riots and guarding dignitaries. And she's like, this isn't what I signed up for.
Exactly.
So she leaves and becomes a mercenary. She leaves and becomes a mercenary. She takes all that skill with her and all the intent of like, I'm going to get vengeance for my planet that got blown up. So Leia's doing it in a very different way. Cara Dune's doing it in a, knucklebones way. And so when she's a merc and she's got the chance to take out Imperials, like the client, like Moff Gideon, she's got the bit between her teeth, and she'll throw a lot in with the Mandalorian or with Din Djarin or with Grief Karga and stuff, and then she becomes a marshal on Navarro, and that's another turn in her life. She's starting to put down roots now. She's built up relationships, and she's distrustful because of what's happened to her, but now she's got friends, and so there's definitely more to tell about Cara Dune. And I'm annoyed because we lose the access to the character now. We don't only lose the access to the actress, and I like Gina Carano in the role, so that's not a criticism on her in the role or anything. I liked her in the role. The whole thing's a hoodoo show anyway. It's from top to bottom, trying to be family friendly. My big loss for me is that we've lost, by the looks of it, we've lost that character now. How do you feel about it? Did you have a kind of a connection to, because obviously Cara Dune is a rebel and you're in the Rebel Legion, so over time, we've been locked away for months, so you've never probably seen a Cara Dune cosplay out there. But do you feel like we've lost a little bit as well?
Yeah, I kind of do. I mean, I did say this last week. I think it was just a disappointment to have lost a character, but at the same time, kind of always felt like the character could be a little bit generic. And I think that's just from what we had seen from her and the backstory we had gleaned from on screen on The Mandalorian. So I think there would have been lots of avenues, and there always is, to basically kind of create and delve into a character's backstory if given the chance on screen. When you bring up the RL and the Rebel Legion. So obviously people were asking about what is the fate of the costume, shall we say, so the character as a costume in the club.
Yeah.
And I think fairly rightly so, basically Rebel Legion have kind of said that the character and the costume are two separate things from the actress, and therefore members are more than welcome to continue, if they want to wear that costume and continue to develop and build their own costume, because I think it's quite a cool costume. It's
a great costume.
It's a great
and there's
costume.
a couple of them, isn't there?
Yeah, exactly. Slight variations and stuff. And I mean, and there's some people in the UK who have done that costume. And like you said, because of the pandemic means we haven't actually had a chance to see any out at any conventions. So hopefully at some point this year that might change. So that would be great.
For everything in one location, daily news, reviews, interviews, podcasts, video, and social media feeds, bookmark FanthaTracks.com for Star Wars news 24/7, 365.
At some juncture, Cara Dune as a character is probably done, well, almost certainly done now in live action, but hopefully just as a resolution to the character, purely the character, that either down the line there's an animated show and they can give the character some sort of extra background or resolution, or at least a novel or a comic or something, because it will always feel like unfinished business to me anyway. It's a shame that the real world has kind of encroached upon a character I personally thought was worth further investigation.
Obviously, we know that they're meant to be Mandalorian books and a publishing program. If they ever do like a Mandalorian comic or like a retelling of this first and second season, what they do with the character, they're going to have to include her. Do they go with like a fairly correct likeness to Gina Carano, or do they just maybe kind of like alter it slightly just so there's an artistic interpretation? Yeah,
that's a good point, because she did say in that interview, reading through the interview that she did, where she's good as says there's certain things I'd like to say but can't because Disney won't let me. And that's the classic NDA that anybody, you've signed them, I've signed them, anyone who's dealt with Disney or Lucasfilm will have signed them. You go to the Presidio, you sign one when you walk in the door. Everyone's subject to these things, and she's bemoaning the fact that she can't really say what she wants to say because of that. But on the flip side, I think, we talked about it last week, the whole likeness thing. Carrie Fisher classically, mentioned it a million times. Every time I look in the mirror, I give George Lucas $1. So they, inverted commas, I guess, own the look of Cara Dune. It must be a concern to Lucasfilm and by extension Disney, but specifically Lucasfilm, because it's happened once now. The precedent has been set. Every time we do something like this, you set a precedent. It's like now everybody else is like, there's the line now. We know where the line is now. The next person comes along and they go, well, that was where Gina crossed the line with Lucasfilm and Disney. Where do I sit on this ratio?
If you're approached by Lucasfilm and Disney, I think you have to weigh that up. What level of autonomy is important enough to me to turn down this role, or accept that if I take on a role in a Star Wars project or Willow or whatever, that there may be things that I may want to say on social media, but maybe I won't be able to. Anybody who's going to enter a contract with either company will have to be aware, and is going to be aware of obviously what's happened with Gina, to then obviously at the very least give them pause to thought. Now, whether or not that then maybe works to their disadvantage and turns some people off, who's to say? Only the future's gonna tell us that.
I'm Corey D, and I get my Star Wars news from Panther Tracks.
So if we continue to mind the tweets of this episode's inadvertent content contributor, Soraya Wilson, we come to probably the most noticeable tweet to come out from her chat with Rian Johnson, which is the fact that his Star Wars trilogy, the one that was announced just prior to the release of Last Jedi, is still on the cards. Soraya's tweet reads, I'm just going to post this now as I can see I'm going to get a lot of requests. Yes, Rian's Star Wars trilogy is still on. No dates or timelines as he has other projects going on, but it is still happening. So obviously fans of Last Jedi rejoiced, whilst those who weren't cried out in dismay. Where do we think this all stands? Rian says it's still on the cards, yet we haven't had any confirmation by Lucasfilm since the initial announcement, and there was neither hide nor hair of any news about it in last November's investors call. Do we think this is likely to happen?
Yeah. He did direct a film that brought in $1.3 billion worldwide and, satisfied a lot of Star Wars fans. And it's always the vocal majority. I think really it's the vocal minority. We only see snapshots of things on social media. And because, we're so in amongst the mix of it with Star Wars and Star Wars news, the amount of general people who would consider themselves Star Wars fans who don't know there's a StarWars.com is staggering. And it's been on the posters since the prequel trilogy. Things like that. General Star Wars fans don't delve into the fandom the way you and me and a lot of people that we know, but that is such a small slice of the wider audience that Lucasfilm and Disney are aiming for. So most people won't even know there's an issue. And it's only a perception, an issue with either The Last Jedi or with Rian Johnson. So I think from a business point of view, you've got a director, in the same way that Mena Massoud makes sense to me coming in to play Ezra because he's just starred in $1 billion movie for Disney. Again, that's a huge tick in his box. I think with this, I don't remember hearing any issues on the making of The Last Jedi. It seemed to me to be a very smooth process. It was, I believe, the least expensive of the three movies, so he brought it in at a good budget. JJ's films cost more. Again, it made well over $1 billion. From a personable point of view, he seems to be a very easy guy to get along with, and he has a vision. So he had an idea of what he wanted The Last Jedi to be and where he wanted to take it. It felt to me he was fairly unswervable, and I would imagine movie directors they've got to collaborate. Everybody on a film has to collaborate, but I would imagine the studios probably like the fact that they've got a guy who kind of knows where he wants to take this thing. The sequel trilogy, mentioned it earlier, the sequel trilogy suffers mostly because there wasn't that continuous solid thread and that it did feel like it was being made up on the spot. I don't know people who see that as, I'm not saying that as a criticism, it's an observation, but people who see that as a criticism will go back to the original trilogy and say, well, George was making it up as he went along. Yeah, he was. Yeah, he kind of was. There's loads of elements of the original trilogy that were made up, but look at the prequels. Lucas had waypoints to reach on each of those films, multiple ones, and things he had to satisfy. And I think personally, as an exercise in satisfying so many what were considered clearly defined points and bringing it home a trilogy like the prequel trilogy, so underrated. But you get to this era, the sequel trilogy, and it's, you used the phrase the other day, we used it as an episode title, it's blue skies, isn't it? It's like there's nothing, you're not aiming for anything. It didn't matter. Constable Zuvio might as well have been Snoke. So, of course, when the expectation gets subverted in Rise of Skywalker and they go, oh, Snoke was just a puppet, it's actually this guy all along. I was not in the least bit surprised. I've been saying it for years. Go back to June of 1983, when Richard Marquand's doing an interview with Preview magazine and Lucas has sat him down and said, you will find out in the next trilogy that everyone's being played by a puppet master and he's above everything and he's controlling everyone and nobody knows it. What happened in the end? Palpatine was the puppet master. It was exactly what Marquand had put out in public forum nearly 40 years ago. No surprise. And I would put my bottom dollar on Chris Terrio and JJ being aware of that interview. And obviously they're going to have access to notes and noodles and things that we never will ever see. So I rabbit. But point being is that I'm not surprised, and I think it will happen. But I'll throw a question back to you, otherwise I'll talk all day.
Yeah, yes,
I haven't been doing a lot lately.
Okay.
So do you think then that this next trilogy will be a completely standalone unit, like the High Republic. Keep talking about High Republic. Like the High Republic's its own era, its own thing. It's separate from a lot of stuff, but it uses all the conventions, and ultimately it's going to fold back into the whole. And I think they're doing a nice job with it from what I've seen. Do you think a Rian Johnson trilogy would be the same? Do you think they might set it somewhere, away from the main action, set it in a different time period, move it ahead 100 years? What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's probably the thing to do. One of the things that actually I got out of The Mandalorian was that actually when you read the Art of the Mandalorian book, they actually talk about the fact that Dave Filoni would often do set visits on The Last Jedi, but it was Ryan who basically kind of said, look, come and have a look through the viewfinder. This is why I'm doing this. This is the reason that I'm setting this shot up like this. So he really helped to mentor Dave Filoni, which is slightly ironic, I think.
Yeah.
So you can kind of see that potentially, yeah, if Lucasfilm as a company have had a positive experience, then why not? Then why not bring him back? I mean, he clearly is a gifted director. I think personally myself that there's parts of Last Jedi which are just visually stunning, and they're so well shot.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, some of the stuff, even with Mark Hamill in the cave, the tree, when he's talking about the books and that, that whole thing, up until the point where he kind of makes a quip about like Jakku being from nowhere, is some of the best acting that I've seen of Mark Hamill. There's always going to be, and I suppose the risk, again, as we come back to now, is going to be potentially the vocal minority and the hashtag boycott Ryan's trilogy or whatever the hell they're going to create for a hashtag. How much of an effect that could potentially have on potential box office revenue? Because like you said, if Disney pretty much it's a publicly owned company, it's publicly traded, so you have shareholders and board of directors and that, and ultimately if you want to appease the shareholders, you bring back somebody who brought in like over $1 billion in profit. That's what you do. Yes. And then if there's like, I don't know, a small percentage or a percentage of fans but aren't happy, well then you might miss out on some revenue. But the difference is that if you set it in a different era, like you said, 100 years in the future or 25,000 years in the past, even before High Republic, and there's no risk potentially to damage the reputation or the expectations of fans, with fan-loved characters such as Luke, then I say, okay, let's see what he can do. I also think that it will kind of depend. I think it's all very fluid. I mean, you do hear about some movies just take years and years to get off the ground. So, and some movies get talked about and rumored that they're happening and they're not happening. That so a bit like even with some of these series from Disney that they did announce, it's not always like necessarily 100% guaranteed that everything's going to actually make it to the screens. It could be that actually,
that's true.
Ryan does Knives Out 2 and then he moves on to something else, and he's then booked in for the next 2 or 3 films, which are with Warner Brothers or whoever, and that's when Disney approached him and say, we want to start working on this trilogy, and then he says, I'm now booked up for the next 5 or 10 years, so it's going to have to be after that.
Yeah.
By which point they go, okay, well, we'll get back to you, or we'll leave it then. I think it was probably a mistake that Lucasfilm did announce it so quickly, and so closely to the release of Last Jedi. I think they probably should have waited and kind of let the dust settle a little bit. I mean, just more from a kind of like to focus on The Last Jedi, not worry about like other stuff.
Thing is, though, when Ryan was doing, I mean, he was working on Last Jedi before they'd finished Force Awakens, so he was writing it before the first film would come out. Franchise filmmaking, it moves on at a ridiculous rate, and so do franchises. So when Ryan was making Last Jedi back in, what was it? When did that come out? 2017. So like 2015, 2016, that sort of time. Disney Plus was a dream, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It was it wasn't a reality. We didn't know what we were going to get. And so now, if Ryan's announced to do a new Star Wars trilogy, it's not the only show in town. I don't just mean in Star Wars as well. You got all the Marvel stuff, all the other stuff that's around DC are building, Spider-Verse is building, Transformers are coming back, and there's all these things that are happening. I think when he was doing Last Jedi, other than the next film, which at that time would have been Solo, there wasn't all this other stuff. So if Ryan comes back and they say, yeah, Ryan's doing a trilogy, and there's people kicking off and moaning about it, don't forget that, like you've just said, this could be 5 years down the line. I mean, Marvel announced Fantastic Four and Blade. They've announced the actor that's playing Blade. I don't think they've even started writing it yet. So we're in a totally different world of sort of laying down stuff that's coming up ahead. Obviously, we've had the whole pandemic thing, which is crunching things. So now we get 4 Marvel films this year, 4 Marvel films next year. We've got Falcon and Winter Soldier coming soon. WandaVision's not far from finished. What If starts not long after Falcon, I think. So a lot of stuff. Our Fridays are going to be packed. We've got Book of Boba Fett. Then we've got Mando Season 3. We've got Bad Batch before that. So there's so much stuff coming. When Ryan's film comes, trilogy, whatever it is, it ain't going to be the only show in town, is it? So I think that lessens the impact of any negativity. What do you think about that?
I think a fair point is that just because he does a film doesn't necessarily mean it's going to hit the silver screen. It could just go direct to Disney Plus.
That's a great point, yeah.
And maybe that's how you do it. That's how a Star Wars film's going to cost you a good 100 million. Easy.
Very cheap. I think the prequel trilogy, I think the cheapest was Attack of the...
About 125.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
My point is that you could probably, with the stagecraft tech and all that, and how they've been kind of shooting fairly more economically, you could probably do a feature length, let's say a 90 minute, so like a short feature trilogy. You could do 3 of those, and I don't see people cancelling their Disney Plus subscription for that, because like you said, there's so much other content around, and it just, what it just means is basically you just don't watch it, and therefore it doesn't get the downloads, and then maybe that's when Disney kind of go, well, okay, maybe we shouldn't put stock in this person. But at the same time, franchises are moving along very quickly, and the problem is that, we're in this process of trying to create the Mandoverse and try and really set that up as a thing. We're also now trying to set up the High Republic as its own thing and tie into, I guess, Acolyte and anything else that they decide to set in that era. So you've almost got 2 Star Wars franchises in the franchise of Star Wars already. There's no reason why they can't go, okay, well, we'll just do something different. Interesting to see. It'd be interesting to see if kind of like Ryan actually does go on record to talk about this, because obviously the conversation that he had with Soraya was kind of like an off-the-record online chat that she had won as an auction. That's what I've been led to believe was like a charity auction, a bit like for one that I think she did for Daisy Ridley. So she's kind of free to basically kind of post these tweets, but it wasn't on the record. I don't think we're going to see a transcript, and I don't think we're going to see like a video or like an article come out of this. There may have just been a small smidge, maybe Rian Johnson kind of just saying, I'm just going to save a quick and easy safest answer I can without potentially getting myself into potential issues by kind of saying, well, I'm waiting for Disney to kind of get, pull their fingers out, or I'm waiting for Lucasfilm and Kathleen. Who knows?
That's a really good point. The last thing we heard was he's doing it.
Yeah.
We've not heard he's not. And it's not for him in a chat that somebody won in an auction to say, well, actually, I'm not. That's for Disney and Lucasfilm to say it. And that's not to say he's not. He probably is, for all the reasons we've just laid out. Like you say, he's 1 for 1. He released a Star Wars film. It made $1 billion. Okay, it was half of what the previous film took. But Force Awakens was a once-in-a-generation thing. It really was a once-in-a-generation thing. The build-up and the anticipation for that film.
Well, like Phantom Menace.
Exactly, like Phantom Menace. And so you can't really, it's not a fair comparison, even though it is it's like $1 billion drop between 2 films, near as damn it. That's ridiculous money. But it's such a unique scenario for The Force Awakens. It's not a fair comparison. It's not a fair comparison. So he's brought in a film that cost less money to make, and brought in a buttload of money and the merch and blah, 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 blah. Yeah, I think that's a good point. Yeah, it is a good point. It's not for him to say to some person, who won an auction, it's not his place. It's not the place to say, well, actually, I think I'll announce it here on Making Tracks that I'm not making the next Star Wars trilogy, but, don't quote me on that. It's not the place, is it? But I think he will be. I do think he will be. I think there's enough reason to do it. And personally, I think it probably will be set in its own thing. It'll be original characters, which would make sense. It's another expansion of the Star Wars galaxy as well, isn't it? And he's shown that he does have a beautiful eye. Some of the visuals in that film is stunning, isn't it?
I like I said to you, and I think a lot of people kind of know this fairly well, that I am a big supporter of Last Jedi. I'm not going to kind of sit here on social media and kind of defend it, every time somebody tweets about Last Jedi being crap, because my opinion is that I think Last Jedi is a decent film and there's some really good parts of it. And then obviously, other people can, disagree with me on that. So, I will be looking forward to it. I mean, I'll be really interested to see what he can do. And, fingers crossed that this does come about. Well, Mark, I think that was a nice little discussion we had today. We'll have to have you back on sometime soon. But I think this is all we have time for this week, unfortunately. So a big thank you to everyone who's tuned in and downloaded this week's episode. No listener's question this week, but if you do want to reach out and send us a question, or even if you have thoughts on anything that we've chatted about today, please do so. We do love to hear from you. Mark, can you let good listeners know how they can get in touch?
Yes, and thank you for having me on again, and I hope we haven't alienated too many listeners. If you want to be a part of the action and stay updated on all the latest Star Wars news, visit panthertracks.com or check out the free Panther Tracks app through the App Store to follow us on your mobile device. You can reach out to us and send in your listeners' questions by emailing radio@panthertracks.com. Mark just said it, we've got nothing in the bag, so we have empty sacks. So send us loads of questions and we will talk about it on the show. Comment, like and share on any of our social media feeds at Panthertracks, and be sure to subscribe, leave a review, preferably a 5-star one, on Amazon Music, Apple, Audible, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcatcher or spot speaker of choice. And as always, thanks to James Semple for composing the Panther Tracks intro, Adam O'Brien for our Making Tracks opening music, and Mark Daniel and Vanessa Marshall for our voiceovers. Now be sure to watch Good Morning Tatooine when it comes back. It is going to be back in a couple of weeks. I've spoke to Brian. Things are moving forward on that one, so it will be back, and it'll be live on Panther Tracks Facebook on Sunday evenings, 9 o'clock UK time, and then later on Panther Tracks TV, and then on the site.
Brilliant.
So there you go, episode 78, all wrapped up and done, and we can go and cook some Sunday dinner now.
Sounds good. Mate, you take care. Everybody else stay safe, and we'll catch you at the next episode.
Coming up next on Panther Tracks Radio, it's another episode of Making Tracks.